Hello, wives, future wives, and also lovers. If you are joining me in my Facebook group, welcome back to another Wife Side video. I am LeCo Hanson, a military marriage and wife coach, just out here trying to help bring the divorce rate DOWN. And today I am really excited about this topic that we're going to be talking about. So let's waste no time and get right into it. So we have been hearing about the word intentional throughout the past few years. Everything that you need to do, you need to be intentional. But what does that mean for our marriage? Does being intentional mean that your marriage is struggling? Or does being intentional actually save marriages? What are some of the things that you should be intentional with? So my first question to you is, does being intentional really save marriages? And I will have to say it depends on the individuals that are within the marriage. So if you have to be intentional, or you're in a spot where you need to start being intentional and both parties really want the marriage to work, then yes, being intentional could definitely help save your marriage, right? There's a lot more things that need to go into that pot to help you save your marriage. But if you are being intentional in the areas that you feel has caused your marriage to struggle, then yes, you should see a turnaround if both parties are, invested in making the marriage work. Now, if you're not both on the same page, then you both need to become on the same page to help save your marriage. And I think that is key for any marriage that is struggling. If both parties are on the same page and looking towards the future as one, then yes, it could definitely help save your marriage. Now, it's not going to work for everybody. Being intentional is something that really takes a lot of time and effort from both parties, and it's not just going to happen overnight. Whatever got you to the point of having to be intentional, it probably was a couple of years, a few months, weeks that took it to get to this point, right? Now, the next question would be, if you're having to be intentional, does that mean that your marriage is struggling? I have to say no, that does not necessarily mean that your marriage is struggling. It's just some things that you have probably recognized in your marriage that have gotten put to the back burner with the process of life. Like for us, for my marriage, throughout the years, things have changed. We've, endured some things have went away and all this other stuff. So some of the things that we need to be intentional with now, maybe because we've had children, we need to make sure that we're focusing on ourselves. And that could be the same for some of you out there. You've welcomed members into your family. You've probably moved. I know that a lot of my viewers are military spouses. So you're probably, uprooting your family and going through PCSing and all these other things. And if you're not in the military and you're just a regular civilian, there are things in your life that may have happened that make you have to be more intentional. So I don't think that if you have to be intentional in your marriage, that your marriage is struggling. It's more of like you all recognizing, hey, we used to do a lot more date nights, but because we have kids, we're not going out as much. So having to schedule those times where you are making time for you and your spouse, that's actually being intentional, but that doesn't mean that your marriage is struggling. And also too, we have to think about what I've talked about over the past few weeks is like going through the motions. Maybe you have realized, or you and your spouse have realized, hey, we're just kind of going through the motions. We're not being intentional, or we're not doing things that we used to do. We need to be a little bit more intentional on focusing on that so that our marriage does not struggle. So I don't necessarily think that if you have to be intentional in your marriage, that means your marriage is in a struggling state. You're just recognizing that there are some things that we used to do that we're not doing anymore, and we need to be intentional about that. So for me, I think that it's very important that when I'm talking to my clients, and depending on what they used to do and that they want to bring back, those are the things that we really focus on and saying, let's be intentional in those areas. But some of the things that I see across the board for all marriages, or a majority of the marriages that I work with, is these three things, okay? So conversation. You have to be intentional about some of the conversations that you have, especially for my military marriages, especially when they are deploying or training, it's important for you all to focus on those conversations that are not just, I miss you, I love you. You need to be intentional because your marriage is still going on. You are changing, your spouse is changing. And for the ones that I work with that are civilian, like, again, conversation is very important. If you're just having those, how are you today? Like, okay, your day was good. This is how my day went. Those conversations are just going to happen, right? But you need to be intentional about the conversations that are happening, especially when you're just starting out in a marriage. Things like finances. Let's be intentional and have conversation about finances. Do we want children? Let's be intentional about that. What are our expectations? Like, you have to be intentional about these conversations because, you know, once you're in that love phase and you're falling all in, oh, this person is perfect. And it's not until you actually live with the person, you actually get to know the person, that you're like, okay, well, maybe let me peel back this onion and get to the ground or the root of why this is happening, right? So those are the three things in conversation that I think that you should be intentional about up front. Again, it's going to be finances. Do you all want children? And then what are your expectations? Like, just like, let's sit down and have these conversations, right? And then another area where you want to be intentional is intimacy, especially for those couples that have been together for a while. And then, you know, you start to kind of slow down on the intimacy. Like, you all need to be very intentional about having those conversations because intimacy is very important. And I've said it time and time again on this channel that it's important for you to be intimate, both mental and physically, with your spouse. So being intentional on having those conversations or planning time out to have that intimacy, right? And then the last one is quality time. It's very important that you and your spouse sit down and have those conversations about what does quality time look like for you, and what does quality time look like for me? Because two people may think quality time looks different, right? Somebody like, as long as we just in the same room, breathing the same air, that's quality time. And the other person may like, no, I really want us to focus in on each other. So, and again, another important conversation to have, but making sure that that quality time is being had. Being intentional is very important as we go through our busy lives. Like, I have 1,000,001 things that's going on in my life. My husband has 1,000,001 things that's going on in his life. And the same for you all that may watch me. Your spouse and you may have so many things going on in life. It is so easy to just focus in on those things and just be like, my spouse is going to be here for me in the long run. But one thing that I've seen on, you know, my Facebook or in my, specifically in Facebook and Facebook groups, is that some of these spouses are like, well, you know, me and my spouse have kind of grown apart. And it's just like, well, were you intentional? Did you recognize that? Are you intentional? Are you making sure that that quality time is happening? Even if they are deployed or they're training or they're going on a business trip or whatever the case may be, because it's not all specifically to military spouses and marriages. I know other people watch me as well too. It's, are you intentional with the dynamics that you all have in life, right? If you're working a 9 to 5 and you have to come home, you have to cook, you have to do all these things, like, what time do you give to your spouse? So being intentional is very important, and it does not necessarily mean that if you're intentional, your marriage is struggling. And no, being intentional does not save all marriages, but I think that if two people are willing to work together on saving their marriage and incorporating intentional things in their marriage, then yes, you have a higher chance of staying together and your marriage succeeding than someone who's just like, I see this happening, we're not doing anything about it, and we're just going to continue to live this life and see what happens, you know? So that is my spiel on being intentional. Let's have conversation in the comments. What do you all think about being intentional in marriage? Does that necessarily mean that the marriage is failing? Does being intentional work? Leave it in the comments below. Let's have some conversations. And if you are currently in this position where you're like, we need to be intentional, we just don't know where we need to be, and you need some help, it's okay to have a third set of eyes looking at your marriage. with unbiased remarks or comments or whatever the case may be. Like, I am really wanting to help save marriages and bring the divorce rate down. No, I am not a licensed therapist, but that is what I am going to school to do. But I am a certified relationship coach, so I would be more than willing and happy to help you in your marriage and help potentially save your marriage. If you are interested in any of my services, please don't hesitate to check out the description box. I will have my email down there. So if you have any specific questions, you can go ahead and email me. Or if you want to see what type of services I do, I would also have my website linked below. Don't hesitate to reach out. It's always good to hear from you all and see what you all have to say or how I can help you. Until next time, wives, future wives, and also lovers, BYE. Bye-bye.